Okay, welcome to our video for our sci-fi graduate class. We're talking about sci-fi literature, and today we're going to be talking about all the things we think about the books that we've read so far this semester and different themes that we've noticed throughout the literature. And we wanted to share our thoughts and opinions with people on the internet and see what responses might be from other people and if they align with our views and not.
So basically, we broke down our semester with these books down into two major units. So before our break, we talked about a lot of books that dealt with AI and more specifically artificial life. A couple of the classics in there, we have Frankenstein, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Once we move past that, then now we're currently, before we wrap up the semester, in the unit about near future speculative fiction. So a lot more of these books have been written a lot more recently. And a lot of stuff just in class and between ourselves has come up about the comparisons between these two general units and then kind of the genre itself. These are obviously two of the more popular approaches to sci-fi. So I think that there's a lot of interest in where we could kind of break them apart and tie them together, put it in a bigger, perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think what's really interesting too is what I've noticed as I'm reading is like comparing it to, because I feel like a lot of the science fiction that I've read before this has been like YA science fiction, and the whole like this is definitely more adult science fiction, and I think that like even though the topics covered are a little different, and I guess it's a bit more of a like broader topics that are being covered, like it's not necessarily just like following one character, it's like saying something societally. I think that you can also connect that to a lot of things like, you know, Star Wars and Star Trek and stuff like that. Like there's overarching themes, at least plot wise and, you know, content wise, that are similar to a lot of books and movies and stuff that I've watched before, and TV shows and things like that. I don't know if you guys have had similar experiences, but
no, yeah, I definitely have. Well, beforehand, I didn't read sci-fi a lot. Like I barely read anything. I just kind of heard about it and I thought it was boring. Then I think going into Bruce's class, like reading all these, especially starting with Frankenstein, kind of eased our way into it, like into the thought of sci-fi, like, oh, maybe I have, you know, read sci-fi and stuff like that. And they have a lot of big questions that weren't typically answered when we're just in our classes talking about books, which I kind of liked.
Well, one thing I kind of wanted to talk about to start, I also didn't really have much experience with reading any sci-fi, and we started with Frankenstein, of course. Do you guys feel like that's actually sci-fi? Like, do you think it, because I know that's a big question now.
I think as far, like thinking about it, it is the like mad scientist.
Well, yeah.
Like it is, and I think Frankenstein, the book, does a really good job at kind of explaining the science behind it. Like you get this whole build up for, like, oh, this dude's super smart, he does all this crazy science-based stuff. And then there's just kind of this like, the secret to life is based in science in that book. So I think that kind of lends itself to that. Like, I can see the speculative fiction aspect of it because it's kind of just like, oh, there's this secret mystery to life thing.
Like the gothic horror people call it.
Yeah, and then there's like the monster aspect obviously can drive it that way. But I think at like its core, besides the monster itself as a character, I feel like mad scientist making thing that doesn't exist, kind of like science fiction, I'd say. For me at least, just in that aspect, like based in science, kind of exploring, especially the like Frankenstein, the huge themes of like life and death, what it means to even be alive. So
Yeah.
I don't know. In that sense, I would say Frankenstein is sci-fi.
well, what's interesting about Frankenstein in comparison to the other books that we read is it's almost villainizing the science in a way, because there is so much like talk of religion and like that push away, like that fear, and the like that type of science shouldn't necessarily be explored. And instead of in a lot of these other novels, I feel like, I mean, I guess with AI and things like that, like in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, like it is kind of a cautionary-ish, but at the same time, it's kind of saying like it's inevitable. Whereas Frankenstein, I feel like was very much like, no, you believe in God, and this is wrong, and you shouldn't create things that God did not create.
Yeah.
I think that also is definitely a sign of the times for Frankenstein too, though. Like people now are a lot more willing to kind of question religion or even just like religious authority and even be able to ask those questions. So I feel like, especially back when it was written, I think a lot of the horror aspect came from the fact that it was so like sacrilegious, like completely defying God kind of thing. But I think looking at it now, it kind of does once again lend itself a little bit more to science fiction, just because we are a little bit more receptive to that, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think also like that. I mean, I guess I don't know. I should probably do more research into the time period, but I feel like Frankenstein was less of a social commentary also than a lot of the other science fiction books that we read. Like it seemed more like a tale
Yeah,
rather
that's how I
than
was
like
feeling.
like Snow Crash. How Snow Crash was obviously like telling the audience something specific
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't have any context necessarily for Frankenstein. I probably should, but I don't. But
If we could pair any of the books together, what books would we put together? Like, and say that they're kind of similar.
it's a good question. I think that Hyperion and Ancillary Justice were kind of similar in
Yeah.
like how outlandish they were.
Mhm.
Like I think that the pacing and the plot were very different, but it is that like extraterrestrial.
They gave me more of the
Space
Star
travel,
Wars,
yes,
Star Trek type
yes,
of feel,
yes.
Dune.
Yes,
I
exactly.
think that Ancillary Justice also goes with the Android's Dream Book thing, because
Mhm.
they both question like what it means to be human through AI and all that. So those
What
two
was-
definitely go together.
The other one, will you scroll down for me here? Not Ministry for the Future. No, maybe it's not. What's the
Death
one
of
that was kind of like?
Death of the
Walkaway?
Novel?
No, the one that was like, the one that Ellie did the presentation on, that was like Ready Player One. Was that Snow Crash?
Snow Crash, yeah.
Was that Snow Crash? Okay,
Yeah.
I think that Snow Crash and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep are pretty similar in their like themes and their like the plot.
Yeah.
Like it just felt very much like this world but different,
Yeah.
whereas Hyperion and Ancillary Justice were like very separate.
Yeah.
They have a more like fantasy feel.
Yes,
Space
exactly.
fantasy.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
And some of the other ones, so like Walk Away and
Mhm.
The Ministry for the
Yes.
Future. Those are things that could very well happen,
Right.
like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Um,
Except I think that Walkaway imagines like a utopia version, and then Ministry for the Future kind of stays with real world.
yeah.
Like I feel like Walkaway still has that little bit of I wouldn't say fantasy life. Like what would you call that kind of life?
I feel like it's the classic, like the tropes for the plot. It's like the YA, but like Hunger Games and all that always has
Yeah.
like the big bad guy and you have to rebel sort of thing. I feel
Mhm.
like that falls into that a little bit more.
Yeah, and Ministry for the Future felt more like social commentary
Yeah.
than a story. Like that's what I felt about Ministry for the Future. Like I didn't dislike it. It was very long
Mhm.
and it was just a lot of different things going on and it felt I would argue that Ministry for the Future felt utopia-ish in a
Yeah.
way. Like not necessarily like that was the ideal scenario, but that like things were possible. Like there's a way to fix it. You know
At
what I
least
mean?
everyone was on the same team.
Right,
Like, that was a big
right.
standout thing.
It gave more solutions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Barack Obama likes it, so
Yeah.
That leads into my next question. With like how, because I remember we were talking about it. Well, I touched on it a little bit in my presentation for Walkaway, like how technology challenges traditional power structures, and like our thoughts on that. I feel like that would mainly go for Walkaway and Ministry of the Future. I don't really know if another one, except for maybe Frankenstein.
Can you expand on that question?
Like, how does technology like with all the drones, all the security, and like basic power structures, they want to be able to control everyone at all times, but like
Mhm.
people, technology kind of like AI, for example. Particularly, people are supposed to be the ones doing everything by themselves, and then AI comes in and kind of just does everything for them, and it controls their lives.
So it expands beyond the creator.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know which. I feel like Walkaway, maybe Ministry for the Magic, obviously, but which other ones do you guys think would fit into that category?
I mean, I would argue that Frankenstein.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna
Um,
say to bring it back to Frankenstein.
Yeah.
That is like the epitome. Obviously, I think it's like unfair to assume that she could have like assumed that computer AI was a thing, but her making a monster that made exactly the same thing. It's implied that his creator should have taken care of him.
Yeah.
When he didn't,
Mhm.
it got out of control, and then all these bad things started to happen. I feel like that is basic exact equivalent of like the Terminator, like finally the computer rises up sort of thing.
Mhm.
It's like when we trifle with things we probably shouldn't, and then we don't take the necessary steps after. I feel like that's where Frankenstein kind of acts more as the cautionary tale there, maybe. That could tie into that, maybe that more religious aspect too, like there's a lot of bad stuff that can happen when you explore these things. But I think more of these later books kind of dive into it from a new angle, because I think, like I said before, like we're a little bit more receptive to actually talking about religious things, so that's kind of lost its shock value. But then also I feel like we all have a different understanding of like AI and artificial life today. So that's a
Yeah.
like different approach definitely. But I would argue that Frankenstein does, so I mean, good start to talk about it at least.
Yeah, I wrote about that in my reflection for Unit 1 and like the creator versus creation relationship and how a lot of times like at least like I said before I read a lot of these books for this class, like it was very much like a fear thing. So like and if we approach technology with fear, it's almost inevitable that it will become out of our control rather than approaching it with understanding
Yeah.
and like a desire to learn more about it. If you just let it do its thing, it's gonna outgrow you. And like Frankenstein, you just let it be and it outgrew him and it became something to fear rather than something he understood. And say, I mean, androids dream of electric sheep. I mean, you know, the androids became more human than
Yeah.
humans because they were trying to kill them and get rid of them instead of trying to understand, you know.
What was the test called that they had to do?
The void comp.
The void comp
Yeah.
test.
Yeah.
The empathy.
I feel like that goes into like, just because we have this science and technology, should we even use it? Like we have it, we have the ability to make it, but should we use it just because we can? Or should we take that one moral grounds point and be like, this is not good for us? Like we probably should just leave it alone and keep going.
I think that's what a lot of just science fiction as a genre gets at.
Tries
It's
to-
just like the moral
Like what are the consequences for people?
consequences
who use
of
them?
actions, and
Yeah.
is it worth going away where everything's might eventually just fall apart and then. But
I mean, I fear that we're kind of beyond the point of no return. Like, it's we can't not have it now. You know what I mean? Like our entire society runs on technology, and so it's like you can't not, and it's just gonna keep developing. It's like because people are developing, and so it's like even if we don't want it, it's you got to keep up with it because if you don't, then it's a problem.
Yeah.
And then spaceships turn into people, and everybody gets freaked out.
Yeah. I feel like people need to think about the consequences of it more though. Like I feel like we read these books and we read about the consequences of people in the book, but we never actually imagine what it could do if this happened to us in real life.
I feel that's where books like Ministry for the Future and like those ones that
Yeah.
like make it so realistic, they implement actual like scientific facts, and it's kind of hard. When I was reading those books, it was hard to distinguish what was actually fiction and what was real and what was happening.
Agreed, especially in Ministry for the Future.
So then what do you guys think about like now? Like the books that they released like now, like Dune, Star Wars, like
Well, those
like,
were
the
released a while
adaptations.
ago.
Yeah,
Dune
yeah. Dune
and
already.
Star Wars and
I
everything.
thought Dune 3 just came out.
The movies.
Well, the movies, but the books have been out for
Right,
a while.
right, right. I think maybe just like I'm talking about like the adaptations to
Yeah.
it, like trying to make it
Yeah.
the book come to life.
Well, I think there's even a big one like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep turned into Blade Runner, I'm pretty sure. And Blade Runner's huge, and like even the original, it's got Harrison Ford in it, like everyone's seen Blade Runner. Like, so I think, I don't know, there's obviously the allure of like big flashy stuff that's really crazy that we can't understand, that's really easy to make into like a movie or something like that.
Yeah.
Just for the shock value or like AAA movie sort of thing. But I think it also kind of speaks for the fact that people are actually interested in these stories. Like, there's a bunch of terrible sci-fi movies that people never really watch, but the ones that end up having roots in something bigger, like Dune, for example, that already, even beyond all of like the production stuff that went into it, that was going to have a bunch of people pull up to watch it because they liked the book. Like, there's already the roots built there through the genre. They had these expectations, and that ended up being really successful. So I think, I don't know, I think the genre lends itself to adaptation pretty well as far as like people like that sort of thing, but also when they can pull on like actual books or maybe create something like Star Wars did where it's like, and they have everything now, movies, games, shows, everything. I think that it obviously lends itself more to, well, obviously people want to make money with Disney and Star Wars, but like it make more stuff, I guess, because it works. I guess people are attracted to it. So I think that right there is kind of my big question, is like, what is the attraction? But I think that it, like, sci-fi seems like a good package to adapt into other things.
I think that specifically within the sci-fi genre, sci-fi fantasy is what's the most attractive because of escapism and things like that. Like, I don't think that the sci-fi books or movies or anything that make people really think about current events and like issues, I don't think those are the popular ones. I think that things like Dune that we can relate to because of political intrigue or romance or action, like I think that's what people are attracted to, and it's a beautiful movie with beautiful design and everything like that, and you know, actors, famous actors and things like that. And so I think that fantasy element is what brings people in, and like that, like it's cool because oh my god, what if that could happen? But also we don't have to think about the implications because it's so far removed. You know?
Yeah, it's removing us from our own reality now when you're reading those books that could happen in your everyday life. There's a lot going on in the world right now, so being able to kind of go to that fantasy aspect is a good way to get away.
Like, I don't think Ministry for the Future would make a very good movie.
Like,
no. At all.
I think it works as a book.
Right.
But as a movie, because it's a bunch of different stories all put together into this one book, and having those, you can't show that factual information the way that you need to, or the same way a book can do it effectively.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And then I even would say that maybe on the opposite end of that argument, like a book like Hyperion might not do well as a movie, because I think it does have all that like space fantasy aspects, really cool concepts, but then just the plot structure, it's like we'd have to go back in time like 15 times and like do all these things that just for a movie don't really make sense. So I think
maybe as like a TV series.
Yeah,
or
exactly. Something like that, maybe smaller. There
expanded.
is definitely room to adapt it, but I think there's some sort of balance for sure. Like obviously you could go for the ones that are easier with a single plot line. Like Dune, the first couple books are really easy to make a movie out of because it's the same like family and characters and everything. And I think, I don't know, it is an interesting point to bring up, I guess. Like even when you have the intrigue that works so well for some movies, like the plot structure that shows up in sci-fi makes it difficult to do that.
Yeah. I think maybe we should take a step back real quick, and I kind of want to talk about like what the authors were trying to do with their books, and if we think that they pulled it off the right way. Kind of like how Walkaway wanted to really show how there is a choice to kind of walk away from life and do something different. Like, what do you guys think? Like, do you think that like at the end of, after reading the book and after thinking about it, the main concept of each book, do you think the author portrayed it right? Or like for the ones that you guys did your presentations on, do you feel like they portrayed it right in the right way, or could there have been a better way to get that message across?
Well, I was going to say mine did it kind of from an unbiased standpoint. They presented facts from, like they were talking about the Children of Kali, and those are kind of an eco-terrorist group, and they kind of lost all train of thought. They, but they kind of presenting it like, should we be violent in response to wanting change for the climate? And then he also presents from kind of higher up, kind of more the government perspective, and how there's a lot going into it, and there's so many changes you can make, and you just kind of got to wait through the process. Like my book, he kind of shows all different sides of it, so I don't have like one specific
Thing.
kind of, I see both.
I presented on Nnedi Okorafor's Death of the Author, and one big thing with this, so this was like a new hit book for her in 2024 right at the end. One big thing with like the original reception was her like really taking a stand against people saying what she was doing with her book. So I think as far as actual authorial intent, she did exactly what she wanted, like made her statements and kind of defended them in whatever way, like interpret it however you want kind of thing. But I think as a reader, taking that approach is kind of difficult, because while she would defend her point, it would also be like, if you try to box it this way, then that's wrong. So I think that would be kind of a difficult one to break apart. But it was, I mean, like as the title implies, a pretty good commentary on like what it means to be a writer, or what it means to maybe have some fame that comes and goes in like this social media age. Definitely a lot of commentary on like maybe like generational traumas, some ableism, obviously. There's all these different things going on that tied really closely to her actual real life. So I think maybe like telling her story and painting perspectives that she's familiar with was really effective. But as far as like the plot, I just am not really equipped to talk on it, obviously, but
I feel like in Walkaway they did kind of good. I feel like they kind of focused more on the walking away part than the other side. Not saying that I think one side is better than the other one, but I feel like with sci-fi in general, if you want people to kind of look and deep dive more into these fantasy real world questions, you have to show both sides fully. And I feel like the other side was a little bit biased. And I kind of wish that he wrote it the way that your author wrote yours, more open-ended, and then showed the other side, and then showed how they conflict.
And it kind of leaves it up to the reader to be like, what side am I on?
Yeah, but in this case, it's kind of like, no, like walking away is the right choice. I'm gonna write more about it. I'm gonna make it seem. So I feel like maybe if that's what he wanted to come off, sure, but I feel like he could have shown that by showing the other side.
It's about perspective.
A little bit more. Yeah, that's me. But as far as like real world things, I know you guys said that your guys' is real world a lot. I feel like mine, like the biggest thing that mine connects to with real world would be like surveillance culture is like the biggest thing. Like how we have facial recognition in protests and the China social credit system, the NSA spying, like all that stuff. I feel like my book specifically does a good job with showing us, like, if you really dig deep into it, like those people, like those big thinkers, you really can see like what they're talking about, like the control side and post-scarcity with do-it-yourself housing projects, open source 3D printing. I definitely think if we had 3D printing the way they did in Walkaway, we would implode. I feel like it would be used so wrongly. What are some things from your guys's? I know you said that yours was mainly like real world. So.
Just talking about Death of the Author specifically, that also is like a near future, more of that speculative fiction side of sci-fi. So I think, like we've touched on with some of these books, it wasn't really shocking for the reason of like, oh my god, they have a spaceship that can do all this crazy stuff. It was just kind of like, here's Earth if something happened a little bit differently, or maybe we're a little bit more ahead. So I think there's a lot of commentary. That one, I mean, Death of the Author was a big like author talking about the writing and publishing a book. Like that was a huge aspect of that. So I think that is really current, even if it is like a small demographic that would be able to relate. But I think even for, I don't know, I could even go back as far as like Frankenstein. I think all of these have something to offer, like for a contemporary audience. And even looking back, I think looking back on Frankenstein now, we can appreciate it a little bit more. But I think like, I don't know, the big thing that we keep coming back to, it seems, is like sci-fi is trying to tell us something. So I think even if we don't always agree on what the actual thing is, that is definitely a key component of the genre. It's like we have these stories and they move forward and we follow them and everything, but then like there is always that underlying thing that we should be reflecting on it. So I think, and like all of these were written with some real world thing in mind, even if it's not super apparent or we all have something that we can like agree on as to what it is.
Well, Death of the Author brings up an interesting idea of like, if something is created by technology and it is consumed like the audience is perceiving it to be a human, like does that make that less valid then? If you like that whole time, like in Death of the Author, we're assuming that it's this human writing this story, but in reality it's this robot writing this story. Does that make the story less valid? Or like less, does that make it less impactful? Or is it like I think that's kind of what she was getting at with that book, is like,
Yeah, that's a good point.
like does it matter even? Like so say like AI creates this new song and you really like the song, are you like allowed to like the song because it wasn't created by a human, or is it less of a song? Like, what do you guys think?
I don't know. I feel like there's a big problem with that right now because there's like a bunch of AI art that can be generated
Right.
and stuff like that. And it kind of is like what makes something human when you come back to like, do androids dream of electric sheep? The androids, and they got or started to have all these emotions that were kind of more human-like, and they showed emotion even more than some of the actual humans there. So would they be creating authentic work if they were the ones writing this?
Well, and it's interesting with the AI that like the level of AI that we have now is just collecting human work. So if it's an amalgamation of a bunch of human work, does that make it
Has the process
inhuman?
of,
Like-
putting things together. Like,
Right. Like if it's gathering things that humans have created and making it into this new thing, how inhuman is that? How separate from being human is that? A bit of an existential question.
Yeah, I think I'm coming back to Hyperion again as an example, just because that was like a super AI heavy book where they actually had like real characters you could follow. But so in Hyperion they have the Technocore, which is like all computers, all AI, completely detached from humanity. And we've how the plot works, like we're on the same side, we work together. But the thing with that is we view it at that point as a completely different thing. Like we understand that is not the way we think, and that's not how like humans are. And so I think at that point, maybe if we had AI like that, then we could appreciate it for, oh, like this is just a different thing that a different entity did. But right now, I think going back to your guys' points that like we do just have generative AI, at least like accessible to us. Like there might be some crazy thing we don't know about, but as of right now, it is just kind of putting things together. And I think, I don't know, I don't discredit the things that it's like taking and using, but I don't think that it's actually taking a step to like make something new. So I think as far as that goes, I don't appreciate it the same, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Well, because then at a certain point, it's like, then it's going to start taking things that other AI has created.
That's
and
good.
all of a
It's
sudden
gonna
it's
just
gonna-
make stuff up.
then it's just
Yeah.
gonna explode from there. So, and I think that's where we get into trouble. You know, that's when it starts to go beyond the creator. Scary stuff.
Well, I guess with that though, it's like, how would we check it though? How would we?
Well, exactly. That's the problem. The Voight comp test.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
how-
It's
So
like, yeah.
we're all in school to become teachers. Currently, we're all in graduate school to become teachers. So, like, what do we think in the future? Do you think you would teach sci-fi? How might you do that if you want to? Would you teach it through books? Would you teach it through maybe a game unit? Would you what do you think?
I remember back in 8th grade, my teacher kind of introduced us to sci-fi, and I think we watched the movies, honestly, or at least we started. We watched the movies and then we went back and read the book, because some of the concepts in these books are just kind of outlandish and hard to grasp, especially if you're like, I don't know how old you are when you're in 8th grade, but I definitely needed help or visual aids when I was reading these books. So we started by watching the movies, and then we went and read through the books and kind of dove in from there. That's maybe how I would want to go about it, but I think there might be a way to kind of turn some of these books into role play games in a way, because I know that's something we've also been talking about a lot in our other courses.
I think that with sci-fi specifically, if I were to teach the genre, because it is such a desirable genre for people to read, I think that would probably be maybe a unit where I provided students with like a list of books to choose from, or like something like that, because it is like, I think students do enjoy the genre in general. And so they can be like, hey, I really wanted to read this book that I found in Barnes & Noble or something like that, or, you know, so I think that making it fun and then maybe having students like do a choose your own adventure game from that, like a sci-fi choose your own adventure or something like creative like that, because it's a fun genre. It's not like a super heavy genre in general.
I feel like it could be heavy though, depending on how the teacher teaches it.
Well, exactly.
So I
And
think
depending on the books.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like I would choose, depending on my grade, I would choose more lighthearted books. And then if I do the game, like I probably would do game because I love engagement and stuff like that. But if I was to, then I'd probably incorporate some of the harder topics in the game, so
Like
that way
some
they're
more
still
realistic
fun. Yeah,
ones.
realistic, engaged, and all that stuff. So mine would probably be mainly a game. I won't lie. Yeah, probably mainly.
Yeah, I agree with all of your guys' points so far. Like, I think it's definitely a really accessible genre, and it's one of those things like maybe the little kid who doesn't like to read but then reads Hatchet, and it's like, oh my god, like books can actually be cool.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of like room for that with sci-fi, and I think it could definitely be adapted into a game pretty well, and it gives students exposure to creative writing. The one thing that I feel like I would want to capitalize on a little bit more though is just like we've been talking about this whole time. All of these books, like we start talking about one thing and it's like, oh, this is making us think about these other things or think about real world things. So I think that's a big distinction between like sci-fi and a lot of the YA sort of sci-fi books, like dystopian novels, because they do, like, those sort of dystopian books deal with a lot of like topics that younger kids should be thinking about, like self-exploration and stuff, but then I feel like it never really translates outside of like you can do anything, like
Right.
whatever, and that's good to hear, but also I think like we brought up a little bit, like bring in some of the more realistic things to talk about, or like, oh, this could be a commentary on like the economy or some of these other things, and like how could this differ, how could we end up here, more questions like that I think would be a little bit more helpful with sci-fi, just because these books like lend themselves to that reflection. But I think this would definitely be more like my creative writing unit stuff. This is like you said, Anna, I think it can definitely be a more fun genre. There are fun adaptations you could get into that way, do some film analysis or something. But then I think it also could be pretty useful to kind of get some of that reflective thinking, maybe some of like the larger critical thinking things. But overall, I think I am biased because I really like sci-fi, but I would definitely like to teach in my classroom, even if it's just a small unit, something a little bit more lighthearted, or maybe just to get a certain way of thinking, maybe more exposure. But I
Right.
definitely think it's valuable.
Would you want to teach it? Like, some of these books are really long.
Yeah.
So how, like, I thought maybe that it would be nice to introduce graphic novels or something
I like
as
that.
a way to
Yeah.
teach this. It'd be
Yeah.
more accessible, especially if you're in like middle school and you're just
Uh-huh.
starting to go into sci-fi. Starting out with those graphic novels, comic books, and there's just a lot you can learn about using graphic novels in general and how they're helpful to students' understanding of what we're actually reading. But
I feel like a debate would be good too, but they would switch sides. Like everybody would debate, they do their side, they debate on their own side, but then they would switch and they'd have to advocate for the opposite side. That way they understand both sides, I feel like, with sci-fi.
Could be, yeah, and like some of the sci-fi books, it could be like the good guy, bad guy as the side sort of
Yeah,
thing.
I
can
feel like
see
the only
that.
one, I feel like I would put it more as like walk away, which side would you choose and why?
Yeah.
I don't think I would teach any of the books that we read though.
Oh,
in
no,
high
I
school.
don't think I would do that in high school
Yeah.
either. Like the
No.
length
maybe
is intimidating.
Frankenstein at the
Frankenstein, I
Yeah,
think you could
yeah.
do.
But
And-
even
and
then, I
there's
wouldn't
still
approach
some
that in a
pretty
sci-fi
sci-fi.
way though. If I were to teach
Yeah.
Frankenstein,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of other elements to that book
yes.
that I would teach. Maybe do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, but there's a lot of sex in that
Yeah,
book.
that's
That-
not really
Yeah.
child
There's
appropriate,
a
and
lot.
also just the way that the like
the
sexualizes
way that,
women.
oh my god, yeah.
Like Philip
Yeah.
K. Dick is
Is-
kind of the main like offender when it comes
He
He's
to
is
writing
the
for
main
himself,
offender.
yeah.
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 Yeah, I think a lot of these have a lot of good topics to think about, but probably not teach in high school.
Right.
Like even
Yeah.
like Hyperion, one that I like. First of all, way too long, and there's like half chapters of sex scenes, so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really not the best. But I think even it could, like, maybe the answer is more that mix of the sci-fi and like the YA genres. Like I know like Ready Player One is decent sized book, but nothing really crazy as far as like PG-13 topics or anything like that. And I feel like it still does offer a pretty similar commentary. I mean, like, obviously it might not be as in-depth of like the money that goes into creating a company like that or how it affects people around the world, but it still does kind of make that point of like, I mean, fighting against the system, all these kind of classic tropes. I think there are, I guess, I don't want to say like easier books that we could dive in with, but I do agree that the books that we read came like pretty heavy, so I don't think that they would be the best. Maybe, I agree with the point, maybe Frankenstein, and that, I think also that too would just be like good exposure.
Right. Well, I think also the good thing about teaching sci-fi, like you've been saying, is like there is a larger social commentary in general, and so you could even have students do like a project where they hang posters for their like
That's-
all the grades to see, or you know, like presenting to another class, or just making some sort of social commentary through the genre. I think would be really fun. So
Say, I think if you wanted to do something like they're the more realistic books, so like Ministry for the Future, and that works with climate change, that could even work in like a science classroom.
Nice.
Use
Right.
as like a
Right.
text to read on the side.
yeah,
and
you
then,
could even work with your
Yeah.
biology teacher in
Uh-huh.
school, and yeah.
So, just ways to kind of talk about
Yeah.
different
For sure.
use different parts of school.
That is a good point. I feel like these sorts of books can definitely lead into more interdisciplinary stuff. Especially like science, obviously. It's like, oh, let's
Right.
actually figure out how this thing could work. Like, that could be a whole
Right.
thing. But I think, yeah, I don't know. I agree with that.
Cool. Are there any closing remarks that anybody would like to present for the good of the order?
I love sci-fi.
Yeah.
I had a good time with this. I don't know, but I feel like it's fun.
I just think that it's a genre that like it really sparks a lot of conversation. And it's
Definitely,
like we've been saying, it's just accessible and it's interesting, and it covers a really broad range of topics. And the limit is endless because it's making stuff up about the future, and you know, you can do whatever you want, really.
I think along with that too, sci-fi is cool because it's not actually us. Like it can be just about us, but it's not us, so
Right.
people can actually talk about it a little
Right.
bit.
There's a way to kind of distinguish,
Yeah, exactly.
not freak out too much.
This has been the No Name Science Fiction Podcast. Hit that like, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell up by your notifications. Follow us. We'll make another video soon. Peace out.
We will not be making another video anytime